Welcome. I'm wondering whether, I know we have a lot of people signed up for this, so we might just give it another 30 seconds to allow Lenka to let people in. But thank you for those who have joined and joined so promptly. We're very much looking forward to our time together today. You might just want to put into the chat where you're from, or where you are dialing in from right now. It's always enriching, I think, to see the widespread and the reach of these sessions. Remind ourselves of how interconnected we are, interdependent across the globe, across the planet. I recognize some faces, and it's lovely to see familiar faces and to also see so many new faces who I don't know, people I don't know. And while you're putting into the chat where you're from, I'll be introducing the speakers in a moment, but just to say that I'm your convener, host, I've written, it's a shorter word for today, but my co-hosts, or not but, and my co-hosts are my colleague at the Association for Coaching, George Warren, who's going to wave, and my colleague from also AC, but most prominently from the Association of Coaching Supervisors, Lorenza Clifford, who's here also, and we'll be balancing our convening together. And I'll be introducing the speakers in a moment. And luckily, we have the wonderful Lenka to manage all the backroom stuff waving there. So if you've got any technical issues, direct your questions to her. Warm greetings to everybody. I think we should make a start, Lenka. What do you think? I know you're still admitting people. We have a lot signed up. Would you like me to wait another moment or so?
I think we can start, and I will, if anybody join us later, I will still get them, obviously, but we still have people coming in. So
I know, I can see they're coming in great waves, and it's a challenge to admit everybody quickly enough. All right, well, we'll just wait another moment or two.
So it's lovely how many of you have joined on video as well. It's great to see your faces, and I'm sure the speakers will be feeling nice and warm towards you, that you are also showing your faces and bringing your voices into this space. We're really looking forward to the dialogue later, after we've had a chance to hear from the speakers. So yeah, lovely to see your faces. Thank you all. Oh, I do encourage that. It's so much better when we can see you too. Fabulous. What lovely, lovely crowd we have gathering here for this important conversation. Okay, Hetty.
All right, let's go for it then. So I'm going to share my screen because there's a number of, whoops, let's start at the beginning. Here's the first slide. Here we go. So welcome to the JGSG Roundtable number 4. And this is also a session that is part of the Festival Fringe, as it were, of the CCA, the Climate Coaching Alliance. So many of you will have found your way here through that route. Others will have come because you've seen it advertised, promoted through the Association for Coaching, or indeed our co-host today as the Association for Coaching Supervisors. You may have come through that route, and we want to emphasize the importance of this element of supervision, those spaces where we can reflect on just the sorts of things we're going to be reflecting on together today. Our topic is ethics, straight talking and myth busting. And I'm just going to say a word or two about the Joint Global Statement Group. It's a bit of a mouthful. It doesn't really immediately say what it is on the tin, as they say, the JGSG. It's the Joint Global Statement Group on the Climate and Ecodiversity Crisis. And we started in 2019 with 3 of us in conversation, myself, Magda Mook from the ICF, and Rita Simons from the EMCC, and we rapidly gained colleagues. As you can see, we now have 11 signatories. The idea was that while there were many individual and collective initiatives drawing attention to the climate crisis and all that falls from that, all the associated challenges in the world, that the coaching profession itself had not, as it were, taken a stand, had not made a statement as other professions had. And so we came together with the initial aim of creating a statement. And I think those of you who've registered will have seen that you can access that statement on any of the websites of these organizations. We now have 11 signatories. You can see their logos there, up there, and we're gaining more every year. Throughout 2021, we had launch events and created open forums for people to at last talk openly about their concerns, their troubles, their professional challenges, if you like, in how to address or their own feelings about what was going on in the world. And as it says there, we grew the number of signatories. Our offering this year, began in the autumn of last year, are these roundtables, which continues this idea of creating spaces, particularly at the collective level. Many people are active and doing amazing things at an individual level, obviously coaching, mentoring and supervisory, but what we wanted was to bring together the professional bodies, sorry, it's got a very sensitive heat pad, to bring together the collective professional bodies in, as it were, a consortium on the principle that together we are stronger than alone, and we can create these kinds of events.
Sorry, Hetty, I muted you. If you can unmute yourself, I was trying to get people still in.
Don't worry, you click the wrong button. I don't know when you muted me and what I said. I want to frame the challenge for today. We could spend a lot of time talking about ethics, but we're actually going to dive in a moment to talk about myths that might need busting. It has been said, and this was our impetus for creating the JGSG, was that we're sleepwalking towards the cliff edge. Everyone today, it is impossible to be ignorant, at least of some, if not many, of the enormous challenges we face, framed by this climate crisis. And our aim with the JGSE was to create maps and routes away from the cliff edge rather than ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. Many businesses, and those of you who work in the business world will know that they're looking for ways to address, to fulfill their ESG, their environment, social and governance agenda. They're looking for ways to respond to discuss, to hold these challenges in an open forum and to promote sustainable practices. So they're increasingly being sought after. And our unique collaboration, as I said, our goal is to extend the reach of coaching and to create places where we can discuss how coaches can mobilize this agenda, perhaps to introduce, to promote discourse around climate change, ecodiversity, and this word activism. What does activism mean? And we will be addressing that directly. Yesterday, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, put out its final report and its final warning that we are indeed approaching perhaps inches away from that cliff edge. So we are in a state of urgency. And I've been looking also at the United Nations Human Development Report they put out reports every couple of years, and this is the one that came out in the autumn of last year, called Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, Shaping the Future in a Transforming World. And I think that shaping the future is something we do as coaches. We live in uncertain times, and we can't dismiss one-off crises as one-off any longer. They're part of a pattern. A healthy democracy requires dissensus as well as consensus. It requires resistance as well as working together. It requires resistance to that sleepwalking, to just going along with and not being awake. So we could say that coaching can be seen as just such a resistance, since, in the words of my departed colleague John Whitmore, coaching is all about helping to raise awareness and to foster responsibility. So in a sense, coaching is already a kind of resistance to just going along with, to turning a blind eye, to simply going with the crowd and acceding to the consensus. And so these spaces, we hope, will be just that. And our format for today is, I've done my framing now, and I'm going to invite each of our speakers to address this: what myth needs busting? And then we'll put you all into breakout rooms. You'll be invited to share in breakout rooms, to reflect, compost and weave, as it were. How do these ideas strike you? What has struck you particularly? What is your experience? We'll come back again for a generous plenary where we can take feedback from some of the rooms, and you can ask questions. We'll have a discussion. And finally, the speakers will address the concept of what myths have been busted today, perhaps coaching myths or other myths. Coaching is not separate from society. We interweave with concepts of leadership and with society, and perhaps what new narratives could take its place. And of course, we want your thoughts in the chat, in the room, particularly at the end. And I'm just going to read a couple of lines as an invitation to all of us from a poet called Mickey Scott Bay Jones. And this was introduced me by, I think, Helen Hettinger, who is, I think, with us today. So thank you. It's called An Invitation to Brave Space. And it goes like this: together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world, and we amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow, and we have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. So that's the invitation today. I'm going to stop sharing and immediately, without further ado, invite the first of our speakers, Stanley Arumugam, to address. And Stanley is a coach, a leadership coach. He's worked in large organizations. He's an OD consultant, and he works with executives and senior leadership teams, mostly in the non-profit public and also to some degree in the private sector. He's dialing in today from Jerusalem, which is pretty much a hot spot in the world today. And his special interest is in coaching and the role it can play in social transformation. Coach Stanley, over to you.
Hi, Hetty, and good afternoon from Jerusalem to all of you. It's good to be joining you for this very important conversation. As Hetty indicated, my particular angle or standpoint comes really from the perspective of coaching as an agency for social transformation. That's what I'd like to engage with us for the time that I have. A few disclaimers: I've not done extensive work in the coaching space around climate crisis or climate justice. And for me, the connection between climate crisis is with social justice. And I would like to make the connection between social justice, coaching, and transformation. But to enter my position, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you my story. Growing up in apartheid South Africa. And I want to weave some of the parallels as I was reflecting in preparation for our conversation today, some of the parallels in terms of my lived experience, my study initially in psychology and then later on in coaching, and some of the parallels in my journey on the path of psychology and how I see some of that actually being played out in the coaching space. So I want to offer that to you and also provoke us to think about where is coaching headed. And I believe that coaching does have an important role to play in social transformation. And I would like to make the case for that in some way. So growing up in apartheid South Africa in the 80s, I studied for a master's in psychology, and my intention was healing and growth. But as I got into the program, and if you've studied psychology at a postgrad level, I discovered that a lot of the models were really of modern psychology, were very Eurocentric, were the individual focus, and very much a medical model, which is about deficit. And so a lot of my initial kind of socializing was, if I had to be trained as a psychologist and licensed, then this is the path I needed to go to be instructed in a scientific paradigm. At an intuitive level, I felt a disconnect with the Western theory and my lived reality in that time in a very tumultuous South Africa at the height of the anti-apartheid resistance. So I couldn't connect my psychology with my lived reality. And I understood going into psychology that this is what I would bring in terms of healing and growth to individuals and my community. At university, in my particular class, there were a few progressive lecturers who introduced us to liberation psychology and social justice, but this was on the fringe. It was not a credit course by any way. In these conversations, I learned of how psychology was co-opted by the apartheid state machinery in advancing their theory of race and white supremacy, and using psychology as a discipline, scientific discipline, to prove the supremacy of whites and justify apartheid. That, of course, left me very uncomfortable, being an activist, student activist at the time, but I needed my certification, so I reluctantly accepted that I must learn and adopt the Western clinical psychology model and straitjacket my lived experience so that I could qualify and register as a psychologist. And so my dissonance began to grow between theory and praxis. Then I entered the world of work in the 90s, a time of significant transformation in South Africa. I practiced as an organizational psychologist, and soon I was introduced to coaching as part of my HR OD practice. At that stage, coaching was not as formalized as it is now. And so for me, coaching became a tool for human development and a great adjunct to my psychotherapy. And the dissonance continued for me as I wanted to actively integrate what was happening in my lived experience, what was happening in the country, but could not find a meaningful connection between my psychology studies and the world of work or what was happening in a social context. And so I enrolled for a postgraduate program in community psychology, and suddenly the dualism disappeared. I was able to think about mental health from not only a Western perspective, but an indigenous perspective. I was able to apply psychology not only for the benefit of a minority of financially able individuals, but also to make my practice accessible to whole communities in need of healing and growth. And I continued my corporate journey in HR, human resources, people and culture. And in that time, discovered the proliferation of the coaching industry. And as part of my professional development, I decided it's time I formalized my coaching experience, and I enrolled for a Master of Science in Coaching. And I want to emphasize the Master of Science in Coaching.
Stanley, sorry to interrupt. Could you begin to just wrap up this first bit?
Yeah.
Because we need to hear from all the other speakers before we put people in breakout rooms, and then you'll have a second piece when we get back, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks.
And so for me, the disconnect was between, again, I discovered coaching not being relevant to the social context. And at the time also joined an international NGO and tried to make connections between coaching, social justice, and some of the issues that we're talking about today. So for me, to wrap up on this, coaching is connected to social justice. And for me, coaches have an incredible role to play in social transformation. And I'd like to explore that in a little more as we get through the conversation. Thanks, Hetty.
Thank you so much, Stanley. That's a great kicking us off, such an important beginning, the link with social justice. And you know my views. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm going to invite, with no further ado, Linda Aspey, who is based in the UK. I think you're dialing in from the UK today, Linda. Executive coach, facilitator, supervisor, well known to many of you, very active with the CCA. She's an active hope facilitator and on the global faculty of Time to Think. Linda works a lot with activists, providing psychological and emotional support, resilience building, and she's also the co-editor of a very beautiful book which is just about to launch, as amongst many. I can't resist a little, let's see, does that showing? I have to put it right by my face. Anyway, it's called Holding the Hope. It's got a wonderfully beautiful cover. I'm sure you were responsible for that, Linda. And you know, that'll be published at the end of March. Linda, over to you. What myth needs busting?
Thank you, Hetty. And I should say, Hetty's written an exquisitely beautiful chapter in it. So I'm going to go straight for the kind of big one. So I feel very honoured that I'm here to see so many lovely faces that are familiar. And I'm going to go straight to the heart of something that's been around for at least 4 years and probably a lot longer, which is that you can't talk about climate change if the client doesn't. And a little bit of background to that is that this is a myth that's been around for a very long time. And when Zoe Cohen, Alison Wybrow, who's, as you know, passed sadly, and myself got together about 4 years ago, we just were in astonishment that coaches weren't talking about climate change. Nobody was talking about it. In fact, the world wasn't. And so we wrote an open letter to the coaching profession as a whole, and several things happened as a result of that. But what's very interesting is that wherever I go to a group of new coaches and we start talking about climate and environment, and by climate change, it's a rather unfortunate catch-all term, isn't it, really, because it's so large and so big. It's not just climate, it's social justice, it's racism, it's an ecological crisis, but let's call it climate change for now, is that people still say to me wherever I go, but what do you do if the client doesn't want to talk about it, or if the client doesn't talk about it? Surely coaching should be non-directive, they say. And what I find interesting about this is the same question is being asked and has been asked for 4 years. Now, if you were coaching a client and they kept asking themselves the same questions for 4 years, wouldn't you wonder, am I asking the right question? Should I be asking something different now? Should we be maybe even noticing that question still remains? And I found it a particular struggle myself when I first kind of had my awakening, because I am a Time to Think consultant and I'm a faculty member and I teach the thinking environment. And the thinking environment is all about providing conditions for someone to think truly for themselves and as themselves. And we are very, very non-directive. We ask, what would you want to think? Do you want to think about? And what are your thoughts? And that's it. But I think the thing is not all coaching is thinking environment coaching. If you've contracted to offer somebody a thinking session, and that's what they know they're going to get, then that's what they would get. But most of the time, most coaches are not offering that. They're offering something very different. And there is no one type of coaching, much as there is no one type of therapy. So we all work in different ways at different times. And so I think, first of all, I would also say is that how many of you, just put your hands up, how many of you would regard yourself as a systemic coach? Quite a lot of hands there. So you've made a choice that you're going to be a systemic coach, and that probably means that you draw attention to the client, to the wider system that they're working and living in. So how is that not directive? How is that different? So what's been happening for a long time is that we're living in a world where climate change is really subject to something called a socially constructed silence. It's enormous, it's overwhelming, people don't know where to start, they're frightened of it. So people are coming to coaching, possibly with this on their mind. But they may not talk about it, they may bring business as usual. And you may have been hired to do business as usual. And yet, if we're not creating a space for someone to bring anything they want, whether it's climate, whether it's an issue around, I don't know, race, gender, sexuality, anything like that, if we're not creating a safe space that says you can bring and be anything you want to be, then we're not actually doing a good job as coaches. So first of all, I say, what's the contract you're offering people? If you are very explicit that this is what I do, this is the things we can talk about, these are the things we might want to consider. How do you feel about that? Then, oh, thanks, Hetty. Then we do not have to batter somebody over the head and say, we need to talk about climate change. And I just want to add one other thing, if I may, is that did you ever ask your clients during COVID how they were coping with COVID when they hadn't brought it up? Of course you didn't. You said, how are you doing? What's happening? How is it impacting you? Why would we think any differently about anything else? Thank you. I'll stop there.
Fantastic challenges, Linda. So pertinent. It reminds me of a well-known psychoanalyst once coined the phrase, the unthought known. Things that we know, but we can't bring to articulate into the thoughts. And somehow it's okay to talk about COVID, but it's not okay to talk about climate change. And there are very good psychological reasons for that, which I hope we'll be exploring. We're going to turn now to Zoe Cohen, our third speaker today. Zoe will be well known to many of you. She describes herself as a mum, a citizen, and a coach, passionate about social justice and sustainability. And sustainability is another of those different ways of talking about this issue. Originally working in the NHS, Zoe dedicates her energies now to activism, civil disobedience and resistance. And she has recently, I'm sure she'll talk about her experience with being arrested. She's one of many, over 130 citizens who have been imprisoned or given suspended sentences for what we call civil disobedience. And this is a real crisis in the UK that I began by talking about the importance of resistance and forums for resistance and in a healthy democracy. And these are being chiseled away in the UK as in other countries. Zoe, I'm going to hand over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Hetty. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Gosh, so much to say. I'm going to try and be disciplined and stick to the under 5 minutes that you've said. I think we get another bite of the cherry later on in this session, don't we? So I'll save some of the stuff and I'll stick to the myth piece, and then I'll kind of come back to some of the bigger stuff maybe. I just wanted to kind of kick off with a little vignette which kind of encompasses how I'm feeling right now. Just picking up off the end of Linda's point about we often ask our clients to check in with people. How are we right now? This morning I've been feeling broken, absolutely broken. And that was kind of exemplified when I popped to a local coffee shop nearby, a little independent coffee shop started by some young people, was taking some leaflets to ask them to put them out for the big upcoming kind of coalition protest in London, legal peaceful protest next month. And in the process of the conversation, I was just asking, I was saying, you know, I'm feeling a bit broken, and this lovely lad who I know is saying, oh, well, why are you feeling like that? And I said, you know, the IPCC came out, I explained what that was, and they gave us our last and final warning yesterday. Had you heard about it? No. He's about 22, same age as my daughter, more or less. Didn't know a thing. He didn't know that the people in power are driving his entire generation and ours and everyone born from today onwards off a cliff. He didn't know. It added to my complete sense of breaking. So similar to Linda, when I say climate crisis as shorthand, is definitely shorthand. For me, it's shorthand for the whole systemic pattern. It's the colonialism, racism, inequality, obscene growthism, blah, 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 that drives it. It's the triumvirate, the deadly triumvirate of emissions, biodiversity loss, pollution, poisoning, you know, the whole lot, and so the systemic drivers and systemic consequences. But climate crisis is shorthand, but that's what I mean by it when I'm talking about it. And I could identify a lot of myths. I'll try and do that briefly. I've got a list of about 8 or 9 in front of me, maybe in no particular order, but and some of these may be coaching specific, some of them not. But hey, as Hetty said, you know, we are a subset of the rest of the population, and we're not separate. Going back to normal, in inverted commas, that ain't happening. We're on a one-way passage now, aren't we? A one-way accelerator to climate hell, as Antonio Guterres puts it, and our leaders have currently got their foot on the accelerator. Linear change. Our brains really struggle with the exponential function, don't they? I really wish more people really understood the exponential function. There's some you know, we think that some people think we're going back to normal, some people think that this is like linear, but it's like, this is not linear. This is exponential. If you don't already understand the exponential function, please go read about it. It means doubling. You know, yeah, there ain't no such thing as linear change in systems. If we call ourselves systemic coaches, we need to understand the exponential function. The language of TINA, some people in the UK particularly may have heard of TINA, T-I-N-A. There is no alternative. Thatcher particularly, I think, came up with that term. There is no alternative. There is. Our economic system has not been around that long. It's a social construct. It's completely changeable. So all this nonsense about the economy is total nonsense. If enough of us chose to change it, we could change it. That green growth is a thing. No, it's not. When the bathtub is full, adding more water just makes it overflow even more. There's no such thing as green growth. I'm happy to debate that if anyone wants to, but it isn't a thing, and it doesn't exist at a global level. Another myth that tech will save us or ESG will save us. No, they're from the same growth obsessed colonialist extractive mindset that the system that's led us to this place. It can't possibly save us. It's just a green tinged capitalism. It ain't going to save us. It's nonsense, and it's denial and delusion and collusion. The myth that Linda's, I think, has already sort of touched on a little bit, that neutrality exists. You can't be neutral in this system. I see you, Hetty. The myth that other people don't care, like links to this, things like our clients don't want to talk about it. The evidence shows that a lot more people care, but we're socialized to think that they don't by the right-wing media, which is most of the media. A lot of people care, but we actually think less people care than they do because we're told that they don't by the media. So don't believe it. Reach out. 2 final quick things. The myth that there are solutions to this problem. This is a interconnected, highly complex predicament, and simple solutions don't address that. And finally, that if anyone's clients is in that sort of headspace that our wealth or our position or our geography might protect us, that ain't true either. That's a myth as well. Back to you, Hetty. Look forward to the conversation.
Zoe, thank you. You packed so much into that. I'm full of admiration and awe. Each one of those could be debated, and certainly should be, for a long time. I'm going to turn now to Liz Hall. Welcome, Liz. Liz is dialing in, I think, from Spain. Is that right? Lovely. Just to keep reminding us, Liz is a leadership and executive coach. She's a trained mindfulness teacher, and many of you will also know her as the renowned editor of the renowned journal Coaching at Work. We're delighted to have you here. Liz also launched the annual Climate Coaching Action Day in March 2020, celebrating and promoting climate coaching amongst many other initiatives. And welcome, Liz. I'm going to turn over to you for your 4 to 5 minutes take on what myths need busting.
Thank you, Hetty, and an absolute delight to be here with you all. So I'm zooming out and going to concentrate on the myth of separation. So I think, or if we turn it around, the truth around interconnectedness, and we've heard a little bit about systemic and interconnected, so I think that's already in the field here. But I think what I was thinking, because we were invited in beginning to prepare for being panelists today, to think the unthinkable. And I was thinking, for me, the unthinkable would be if all coaches, leaders, coach supervisors, etc., were developed in a way that really recognized that wisdom around the fact that we're interconnected. So what would that really look like? What would be on the programs? What would be in the coaches' codes of ethics? What would be in everything that we do, the activities from professional bodies and so on? So, what would the teachings be that would be brought in? So things like, obviously tapping into wisdom from, can you hear me okay now? Yeah. Tapping into wisdom from Indigenous cultures, bringing in mindfulness, individual and relational, compassion, vertical leadership development, all of these kind of things that really, theory U, that help us really work with that fact, that wisdom of interconnectedness, and just it be part of how we develop. So that was what was coming up for me. I think it gets us into so much trouble, doesn't it? That idea of separation, and it's one thing to sort of to know that, but it's like how do we heal parts of ourselves and heal each other so that we can on behalf of the whole. So it's sort of something around that, sort of, if we know that that's a myth, what can we do differently? And that idea that we are nature. So it's not sort of nature's out there and, let's do something to help nature, that we are nature, and everything we do to help nature is us as nature helping nature. And it's a bit of a leap, but I think if it fed into everything that we do, I think we'd see the ethics follow. And there is something about that nourishing environment. And I can think of when I went to Plum Village, which is the community set up by the late Zen monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and interbeing, exactly. So, and Thich Nhat Hanh talks about interbeing. And if you spend some time in one of those communities, you have a real sense of that interbeing. And of course, you're getting nourished by community dialogue and all the rest of it. And one time we went, after a week, my husband and I just as we were leaving said, okay, we're vegan now. I'm not saying everyone should be vegan, or maybe I am, but let's not get into that. But the point is that in that environment where interconnectedness was just part of what we were tapping into, and all the healing stuff, this kind of ethical decision just came about naturally. We didn't have to debate it. We didn't have to think about it. It was just, okay, vegan now, that's it, and continue to be. So that was quite a lot of years ago. But there's something about that if we really, really dispel that myth, and really feel into what the interconnectedness field really is about, and I think the ethics naturally follows. So that's my challenge, really. We really know that we're interconnected, that everything's interconnected. What might shift? Yeah, I don't know how I'm doing for time. I had other things.
You're spot on, Liz. I'm dead impressed. As a terrible timekeeper myself, I'm so impressed. Thank you so much. The wisdom of interconnectedness, and I might add interdependence, that we actually depend, my health depends on yours, which is a beautiful segue actually to our last speaker today, Dr. Joy Peta. Welcome, Joy, from Johannesburg. We're delighted to have you here. And Joy is an award-winning psychologist on a mission, as you say in your biography, to humanize business. And she's currently, sorry, that was my timer. She's currently the chief visionary and healer at the Nomolanga tribe, having spent many years working at places like Deloitte's consultancy. She's a Fulbright scholar, and she has a deep passion for contributing towards a brighter future for Africa and helping leaders invest human energy to work in a more regenerative manner towards collective and holistic well-being. Over to you, Joy. What myth needs busting? Thank you.
I appreciate it. It's such a pleasure to be here from Johannesburg, and especially just listening to all the speakers. It almost seemed planned that I come after Liz, because as she was speaking, I could just resonate with so much of the lens in which she's putting to the conversation. And I guess my contribution in this beginning stage really is to build on that and give my lens, in addition to just the myth around interconnectedness, and perhaps in addition to interdependency, as Hetty put it, to add an element of sort of the transformation and change element. So my statement is that we need to really address the myth that self-transformation is separate from large systemic transformation, that actually they work hand in hand together. And as we look at the wisdom and sciences from indigenous cultures, and even go into what was mentioned earlier around the healing arts and sciences and what's coming within the wellness space, which is kind of where I spend a lot of my time right now, and where it makes sense to bring in the element of coaching, particularly for leaders in Africa who have also been affected by this large macro transformation, and perhaps are asking the question, as I did, particularly at the height of the pandemic, around what is actually going on? How is it affecting us? What is the purpose of this time? And how do I fit in? I think once we start putting that lens of the interconnectedness lens, it's less about what's my purpose. I can't find meaning. There's anxiety and all of this in terms of waking up for the day. But if you just wake up with the appreciation that before I do anything at all, I am connected to the earth, and not just other people, but the trees, the water, the rivers. And I think that is the beauty of Ubuntu that's been mentioned in the comments, that helps us as Africans, particularly who want to go back and learn from indigenous cultures about how did they work it out? How did they live? How did they find harmony with their environment? And what lessons can we bring into today's world that are still relevant, because we are connected and human? And as I was preparing for this talk today, I came across one of my greatest teacher, Carolyn Miss. And basically she's an intuitive healer and author and many other things, but she writes a lot about this space from the perspective of self-transformation and the great transformation, right? We've heard a lot about that, but there's often this disconnect between how am I changing? And I suppose what I wanted to invite into the conversation today, particularly stemming from lived experience, where I myself had to go through such a major awakening of the transformation that is happening inside my inner world, and find the connections in the outer world, so that I can actually, when I'm holding space, which is what I kind of see coaching as really, it comes from that place of understanding inherently the interconnected between you, me, which is even breaking the myth that coaching is one way. There's so much lessons I've learned the other way around from just being in the space with other people and having a developmental perspective shifting, deep awareness, conversation, and response, the ability to respond, sort of muscling with the people we tend to engage with within the space. And I suppose that's the invitation for me. Is the aha moment was, well, I am of the earth, and nothing of the earth can therefore be foreign to me, right? Which is a play of from I am human, so nothing human, even all the suffering is separate to me, but it is connected and there's some meaning I can find in that.
That was wonderful, Joy. Thank you so much. You put it very beautifully. I was very delighted you were able to speak, and I can recommend Joy's article on Ubuntu leadership, where you expand more on these issues. You've all written, and there are many, but this one comes to mind listening to you again, Joy, today. Thank you so much to all our speakers, so much to think about. The invitation now is to go into your breakout rooms. Lenka will be doing the business behind the scenes to get you all in to a room, and to really reflect, compost and weave. You'll have 25 minutes, so it's a generous amount of time. Be spacious with yourselves and allow the thinking to, as I say, compost and weave. And that invitation to brave space. Please go places, think the unthinkable. As I can't remember, I think it was Zoe or Linda who reminded us that that was our provocation, in a sense, in the invitation to this event. Think the unthinkable and enjoy your conversations. And we look forward to seeing you in 25 minutes when we will have a plenary with time for feedback and questions and answers and more discussion.
All the breakout rooms are now open, so you can just join.
Thank you.
Reflect. And
So I'm going to hand over now. Thanks, Lorenza, diving in there. I'm just waiting for everybody to come back because the breakout rooms are still flooding in. But I'm handing over now to Lorenza and George. And George has disappeared off my screen. Oh, there you are. There you are. I'm going to move you to the top of my screen so I can see you, who are going to manage the plenary. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody.
So hello, everyone. And we've got a good chunk of time now to hear some reflections and also some questions that, well, while honouring confidentiality within the group, it would be lovely to hear from some of the groups around what reflections are coming up, and also what questions. So one offer that will help us populate some questions for the panelists perhaps would be, let's put some questions down in the chat box that are still there for you, are still lingering from the discussion, or even sparked from the discussion. So it would be lovely to populate that chat box with some questions. And while we do that, I'll hand over to Lorenza. Are you on mute? Okay.
Thank you, Lenka. Sorry, Lenka, help me out. I couldn't unmute, my unmute button wasn't working. Sorry, I was a bit flapped there because I was trying to unmute and deal with the technical, and I'm not quite sure what you asked me, George, to be honest.
No problem. Well, so we've asked the group, and I can see some lovely questions coming in to share some questions that are emerging from the groups. I'm seeing one that's already capturing my attention from Wendy. What does it mean to move this group coaching profession from talking to action? Would any of the panelists like to answer that one? Give us a wave, Zoe.
Yeah, it's a great question. It preempted something what I wanted to talk about a little bit if I get a chance later on. That for me, I was listening to something earlier this morning with someone talking about how love is a doing word, or love is a verb, and I couldn't agree with that more. It's a really lovely way of putting it. And in preparation or reflection ahead of this session, I thought, yeah, same with ethics, isn't it? Ethics is a doing word. We display our ethics in our decision making and our actions all the time, consciously and unconsciously. So I think we are doing our ethics, we are being and doing our ethics without even thinking about it. And inaction is a doing. It's just, it's a lack of action, but it's still a doing, sitting on the sofa. For me also, it's about breaking down, just like some of the speakers talked about, this sort of artificial separation between ourselves and nature, ourselves and each other, and so on. There's an artificial separation between our different selves, like ourself as an adult parent or whatever, ourself as a professional coach and ourself as an activist or not. It's like, that's nonsense. We're the same person, I believe completely. So it's putting that into action, whether we have our coaching hat on or a parent hat on or a citizen hat on. And I think there's something really powerful and very different about embodied action. And for me, that's been putting my body in places where I risk arrest or risk imprisonment a number of times. But you can also do that in a whole range of ways that don't risk imprisonment or arrest. And for those people in the UK, I've put in the chat a wonderful upcoming opportunity in London called The Big One, which is a big multi-movement 4-day peaceful legal protest. There's going to be hundreds of them, well, hopefully tens of thousands, if not 100,000 plus people there. I think there's something very different about when we get off our sofa and put our body in a place with other people. I think there's a genuine shift in our head and our heart when our body does something different. So I think embodying it, I would really encourage people to get off the sofa and actually join in the streets or join in some action, because it shifts your whole head and heart when your body moves.
That's really strong. Thank you. And I'm picking up one from Richard Bellas. If awareness and responsibility are valued currencies of coaching and of being human, where, when, and how can we most wisely invest or spend or exchange them? I wonder who'd like to respond to that.
Didn't quite understand about the where could we invest. What does
I'll
that?
put it in the chat. If awareness and responsibility.
Oh yes, our currencies. Okay, yes. How we can invest and exchange them? Yeah. Well, if I can answer that, if that would be okay, just with a challenge, really. I think what we need to do is be more interested in well, at the moment we seem as a society in the privileged parts of the world to be more concerned with conserving our way of life than we are with conserving life itself. And I think we have to really have a shift, and that goes through everything we do. We've got to be the change we want to see. We've got to walk the talk. We've got to listen to the inner voice that stops us and says, oh, don't do that, people won't like it, or I can't make a difference, or someone else will fix this. We have to challenge ourselves all the time. And that's the currency of our responsibility, our awareness. And something I've noticed that can happen is people come on trainings. We do trainings for climate cafes and work that reconnects events and things like that. And a lot of coaches come along with the specific intention of learning some skills to apply to their clients without actually having done the work themselves first of all. And I would encourage that it starts with us.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. And it would be lovely to also hear some voices from some of the groups. So would anyone be happy to, again, while respecting confidentiality, share some reflections that came up in that time in the group, and maybe share some of the thinking or some of the questions or new thinking that emerged from it? Give me a wave or come off mute and say hello. We're a very friendly bunch. Richard, come on in.
Right. Well, I think and feel that a myth is that, I said it in the group, I'm going to say it again now, is that death can be avoided. And I think that if coaching is about exploring truth, then it ends up in one place, which is death. But once we really embrace that and do the inner work of knowing that truth and actually feeling that truth and all the fear and discomfort that goes with it, I feel it coming up now. It's such a powerful part of coaching, because it can be a death of an idea, a death of a stuck emotion or a behavior, a way of doing something, a belief system. And then and then what's released is the energy behind it. I think the co-creative, reimagining, regenerating part of it is probably why we've chosen to be here as souls, depending on what your belief system is, and it's going to be fabulous. We don't know what it's going to be, but that's the powerful part of coaching, where neither the coach nor the client knows what's about to unfold, where we step into the mystery rather than trying to repeat the history. But I feel it even making me both sweat and tingle at the same time, that to face death and move through it it's in all our myths. It's that threshold moment, facing the demons, gargoyles, having the courage to step through, and we don't have to do it alone. That's the other thing about coaching, is you don't have to be alone in your aloneness. Wow, something else gets released. So I'm doing blah, blah, blah. I'm doing this for myself. It's been a long time, still doing it. So, you know, what needs to die? Because that's when life really comes alive.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's very strong voice, very powerful, and quite unthinkable. So it really also meets with what we were asking for, really. I wonder if there are other myths that people are seeing that they would like to share that could be busted. Bongeka, you've put the death of convenience just as I said that. Would you like to say more? Would you be willing, please?
I think, you know, in our group, obviously I shared the context around, I'm in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and the different layers in terms of priority. Of course, we have the political upheaval that's happening, and the climate change conversation is something that's not necessarily something that the news, the national broadcaster reports on, but those of us who, for lack of a better word, enlightened enough and care about the world and ourselves as global citizens, we know about it, and I talk about it in my book. So even when I think about how I first came to know about climate change, I think it was the documentary by Al Gore. If correct me if I'm wrong, it was in university 15 years ago, but the inconvenient truth. So then I think when Richard was talking, for me, it's that the death of convenience. And I was sharing with the ladies in the group that some of the practical things, especially in our context in South Africa, that I try and advocate for in climate change in the book is something as simple as recycling, something as simple as, guys, if we really want to see a change, we have to give up our cars. We need to ask the government to build more proper, transport systems. And then the question I ask is, do we all really need a big swimming pool? So there's elements of us who need to be inconvenienced, but I find that people want to say, we need a change. But the minute we have to realize that if we want change, there's a level of inconvenience in terms of how we live our lives that it comes with. So that's why it came to me, that death of convenience, especially when we're talking such a big topic around climate change. And I explore that further in my book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Paula, I can see your hands up as well. What would you like to share?
You're on mute.
You seem to have disappeared. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to build on that, and the death of convenience, and reflect something that was said in our group, I think by all of us in some way, shape or form, but definitely by me. And that is, I think that what we need is to see the death of comfort. And I'm not a coach. I work in organizational development, using the principles of nature as the touchstone for that work. But I can absolutely tell you that it isn't just about coaches. It's about every single profession, and the idea that any profession, whether you're an accountant or an engineer or a marketeer, can be neutral at a time when we are being told that we've reached, the end of the line. The train it's over. it's so over, that I think it sometimes frustrates me. And I think, by the way, the CCA is this amazing invention and this incredible place. And I wish that there were places like this for other professions. So the CCA and coaches in general are way ahead of the game in terms of having a space like this. But the fact of the matter is that I see, and I've seen it, over the last few years, that it's possible to make the mistake that showing up at events like this and listening to each other is the same thing as actually putting something on the line ourselves. And I think that what we need to put on the line ourselves, and I speak as someone who's done it, and it's not easy, is to put our own security on the line and to say, I am actually not willing to take my personal expertise, my experience, my personal passion and genius, and we all have those things, and put it in service to a deathly system. And until we do this, until we really, in the corporate world, 20 years ago, the word was corporate social responsibility, CSR, and arguably that entire profession slowed down change because it created the illusion of change. And actually, honest brokers within the CSR profession are admitting that they spend their time as marginal, tiny teams measuring KPIs, not bringing about change at all. And it's possible for this profession and every profession to do the same thing, to create the illusions of change. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Hearing another voice, is that somebody who wishes to speak or some background?
They look great, and
I think it's background.
That sounds like background.
Well, you don't
Helen,
remember it
you
for
have your
professional
hand up,
service,
and so do you, Guy. You can speak
okay.
after.
And I'll just read it through with
Helen?
you beforehand.
Yeah. Thank you, Lord Hansa. I would like to bring in the conversation we had in our small group, and it seems now that this is really in the unthinkable space, because so often I find when I speak about myself, and this was also shared by others, that the conversations are so heavy and there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of anger. And we were just wondering what might be opened up if there would be more joyfulness, or if we could find lighter ways to have conversations on these important topics. And we were wondering, imagination and inviting possibility, how that might shift something in a whole different direction. And one of my colleagues, she mentioned Lucy Hawthorne. I'm really curious about this now, who offers a practice with Lego. So just wanted to bring in that different sound into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. The notion of play and possibility. Yes, I mean, we've looked at what we've talked about death. We've looked at death in the face in this conversation, and you're bringing in what about the potential, the possibility, or the life, where might that part of the conversation take us? Thank you so much for your voice. Guy, you wanted to speak too.
Yeah, I think just to relate socially constructed silence and death phobia, should we say, I think the really dreadful prospect that collectively we have in Britain at the moment in relation to the whole climate and ecological emergency, what's really dreadful, what's really people are really phobic about, is the death of what might be called our way of life, whatever people pack into that, but it's specifically the end of consumer society. And that means such big changes, and that relates to the inconvenience factor that people are picking up on. And this is blocking conversations. The fear of that death metaphorical death, but of course, people are dying anyway in other parts of the world who are nowhere near having our consumer society.
And so, Guy, I wonder what new narrative you might bring in the space where we're no longer blocked from talking about the death of our way of life.
Well, I think we have to get a lot more nature connected. Interbeing has been spoken about. That's one of the narratives. We also need to be breaking down a lot of the forces that isolate people today too much. And here we are all on screen. Yes, we need to, but too much screen life, not enough face-to-face interaction. Another factor.
Guy, thank you for sharing. And Zareen, I can see your hand's been up patiently. Sorry for not seeing it earlier. We'll close off this this plenary shortly, but it would be really lovely to hear what you wanted to share.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be in the little breakout room and also in this big room in such thoughtful, considered company of people who care so deeply about doing what we can. And it's a slow process. And I want to caution, as a coach in my crone years, just caution against falling into binary thinking and looking for the solution. You know, let's hang on to the multiplicity and the inconveniently messy mycelial networks of many, many, many solutions. I also think that coach education needs a drastic re-looking at, because there has been a lot of epistemicide. Everyone just about here who's a coach will maybe know the name Thomas J. Leonard, right? He's widely regarded as the father of modern coaching, started ICF, etc., etc. But how many also know that he was at least a keen admirer, if not follower, of J. Krishnamurti? You know, so there's so much about the coaching. It's not one style of coaching. How are we complicit as coaches, as coaching bodies, in replicating the methods of extractive consumption by, say, issuing credits for CPD from an expert from one of the key military colleges of the world? For example, how is our thinking on DNI, DEIB, whatever label we want to put on it, connected with the doing that we do in, so I have many thoughts. The small group work, I believe, is really, really a key, you know, deep relationality and intellectual rigor. And I'm currently on an uncomfortable but wonderful journey with a group who have been strongly moved by Vanessa Andriotti's book about hospicing modernity. So we have formed a UK collective, which is interdisciplinary, which I think is also really important. It's not right that artists' minimum wage in this country is £2 an hour, right? What do we value and how do we show that? So let the dialogues continue. I have spoken.
And we loved what you said. Thank you. Inconveniently messy and multiplicity are the words that I have pulled out. But Zareen, please do put those references in so that other people can pick them up and read from them. Okay, so George, where do we go next?
Well, I think we go back to Hetty, and who will go back to the panel.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lorenza and George, and thank
so
you,
much.
everybody. I'm so glad you spoke last, Zareen, because that invitation, that reminder to come back to multiplicity, that there, you know, the arrogance that we might think there's any one solution, we need to guard against for ourselves. And it is right that in this time when the old narratives are being not just challenged, but torn down. Certainly in the UK, all the great institutions are seen as fraying at best, broken, and fraudulent at worst. We've just in the UK had a massive report come out on the Metropolitan Police, those guardians supposedly of our security. And, you know, it's yet another instance where the great institutions that seem to frame, that should be framing society, are breaking down. And in every breakdown, the weeds will start to grow up between the cracks, or the new seeds. Weeds is in our language is a derogatory term. I mean it as a term of resilience and resistance and a term of new growth. And so opening up to new possibilities is where we're going to go now. What are the new narratives that need to be told? And I'm going to invite each of the panelists to spend just maybe 2 to 3 minutes. And I'm going to start at the other end of the alphabetical list. So, Joy, I'm going to invite you first. Just 2 to 3 minutes. What are the new stories, the new pathways we need to be focusing on? Because there's a plethora of choice out there. What's your thinking?
Thanks, Hetty. I think what comes to mind, just first and foremost, is the situation of the problem, or us as part of it, or as part of the situation. All of us as leaders, Hetty, I think sometimes, and this can start listening, the issues around the power dynamics, especially around coach-coachee, those that know, that don't know, those that are more enlightened versus those that are still, you know, on the way. And I think once we've just listened those power dynamics and we went back to just being human to human and looked at leadership models that are more collective, shared, distributed, perhaps even indigenous. When I was just looking at the space, like around climate change as well, they'd mentioned, Otta mentioned how, you know, when we look at how things change and how we change as humans, we need to definitely also make that correlation. And that's why you've seen a lot of these buzzwords around life-work integration now coming into the corporate space. But in essence, it's really going back to ancient wisdom of Ubuntu, which I think I wanted to leave you with in the conversation today about, you know, my choices, the choices that I make, the consciousness around the choices that I make for myself are inexplicably interconnected with the whole world and the whole ecosystem. And I think we might even deal better with the overwhelm that we spoke about of death and all these macro ideas and themes and things when we start breaking it down into manageable chunks, and even looking at change from minor transitions and micro shifts that I can make in my daily, everyday routine as I'm just more conscious in my way of being, right? And even without having a contextual relationship of coaching, if you engage with me with that sense of consciousness and being, you will be changed because we connected, and there will be a trickle effect in the action that we can make to have a larger macro effect. And just to end off, there's this quote that I really like that says, every action counts and is never wasted as we're doing this, because the language of the universe is movement. And I think if we start thinking like that as individuals within the system, interconnected with Ubuntu and heart space as well, not just that intellectual shared intellectualism, but shared heroism, perhaps, of the type of being that we all need to rise up and find the courage to be in as we navigate the space and find our way through it. Thanks, Hetty.
Joy, thank you so much. I love that. The language of the universe is movement. That's a beautiful quote. Perhaps you would put that into the chat. I think that's very inspiring. Liz, I'm going to turn to you. What myths have been busted for you today, or what new pathways would you like us to tread? Thank you, Joy.
Yeah, and it's a joy to follow on from Joy, because that was really resonating so much what you were saying. Yeah, I'm still hanging around with the kind of myth of separation and the interconnectedness, and you know, that sense that, you know, we need to hear everyone's voices. We need to tap into wisdom throughout the ages and from so many cultures, and this moving away from that idea of thinking we need to reinvent the wheel. And, you know, there's so much wisdom out there that we can tap into. And moving away from the heroic leader. You know, we talk a good talk about the sort of leader, and you do in your book, The Future of Coaching, Hetty, of course, that we need to have a different kind of leaders who are, you know, more collaborative, you know, not sort of wanting to be the hero or heroine or whatever. But we really need to bring that into being. And I think, as I've said, we need to look at how we do that. So what theories, what practices can we bring in that are going to help that happen? You know, it's not easy. These deaths we've been talking about, of comfort, of this, that, the other, it's painful, particularly if we have that idea of being separated. So I think there's something about that. How do we shift the practices, the way of being? And I want to also say that action for me is not just doing, it is being. And I often think that people say to me, oh, how can I'm in empathic distress in a coaching conversation? What can I do? And I'm like, okay, fine, there might be something you could do, but it's actually about how we be, you know, and how we hold the space for ourselves, for each other, and that feels so important. So that's the kind of path I identify. And I just wanted to read, to wrap up, one little verse from a beautiful poem from Thich Nhat Hanh, which some of you may know, which is called Please Call Me by My True Name. He wrote it after finding out about this Vietnamese girl drowning herself after being raped by a Thai pirate. And this one little verse is, I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. So I think it's having a container in the work that we do for all of that and not judging.
Yes. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful verse, and yeah, wonderful to bring Thich Nhat Hanh into this space. Thank you. Zoe, over to you.
Gosh, follow that. Thanks, Hetty. Gosh, so much to say. I just echo a number of threads, I think, in narratives that we really, really need. Much bigger, broader and braver narratives. So I very much echo some of the stuff Paula was saying. We need to get out of comfortable because our comfort's all going anyway. So let's get braver about being uncomfortable now, and then we might have a chance of making ourselves and our children slightly less uncomfortable down the line, possibly for a bit longer. I guess we need to hold this sense of kind of direness and dire bloody urgency, with also the sense of being spacious in the moment. And that's a real challenge, because I feel it every single day, the utter urgency, you know, of trying to do absolutely anything to create change. I think that we need to expand our sense of risk hugely. So, for example, I have at least two dear friends in prison right now who were imprisoned a few weeks ago by a judge for literally mentioning a few words about climate and fuel poverty in court. They were given 8-week sentences for contempt of court just for saying a few words. That's what's happening in the UK right now. Many people don't realise, but we need to really raise awareness of basically the slide to fascism that's happening around the world, including this country. And I get frustrated with the political neutrality or naivety and power dynamic naivety in some of our coaching narratives. That's not how the world works. There's a small number of people making really bad decisions, and some of them may be working with coaches, who knows. So I think we need a bit more of a crunchy political aspect and power aspect to some of our conversations, whilst also trying to have compassion for some of those people at the same time. I think finally, well, maybe not finally, but just to say one more thing is that this is the rest of our lives and the rest of our children's lives, and way beyond. So we need to just, for me, it's about having a narrative and a humility of this. It's like, it's both huge and all consuming, but also very poorly understood and currently occupying too far a small siloed part of our collective understanding. Also, I think I would just, codicil of saying we need to really guard against narratives of giving up. Because as far as I'm concerned, even if we're out of time on irreversible tipping points, we've still got to actually live through and support each other and our brothers and sisters around the world on living through the existential reality of what's coming. So for me, that's worth fighting for as much as every bit of carbon and forever chemicals and whatever. So let's fight for each other whilst we're here, because that's what love is, and ethics and love are love in action.
Thank you, Zoe. Beautifully put. Linda, let me turn to you now.
Thank you. Well, such rich discussions today. So I think I would, first of all, just encourage us to move beyond hyper-individualism. Most coach training focuses on the individual. I think you could challenge that within your coach training school, or go back to them and say, what are you doing as your core training now? Systemic training tends to be an add-on. It's never a core thing. I don't think we can continue in this hyper-individualized way for lots of reasons. I think I've been urging for years for us to drop this idea of being your best self. I think we need a best version of yourself. I think we have to create the best version of the world and move away from this focus on self. I think we can challenge the system by saying, if you're invited to coach somebody, you can ask them what's going on in their world. We can learn new skills and those kind of things. And you don't have to be a climate expert to talk about this stuff. And on the subject of talking about it, if we don't normalize this conversation, who's going to? And there are so many children right now who are abandoned with it because their parents don't know what to say. So you're effectively abandoning your child with this. And I was just saying earlier on is that I was listening to a wonderful podcast by an 18-year-old A-level student who'd been interviewing a few climate people. And the first question he asked this man, he was 18 years old, the first question he asked the man was, will we still be around in 100 years' time? Now, an 18-year-old is living with that. I wasn't growing up with those questions in my mind. I was growing up with, what am I going to be? And I say, just learn about climate psychology. If you find this is too hard, and get some understanding of climate psychology, because that is a gateway to you being able to normalize things. And finally, get yourself upskilled. If you haven't worked with groups, get yourself skilled, because that's what's needed. We need to work in communities. Coaching's got a lot to offer. If you haven't worked with anxiety or depression, get yourself skilled. There's not going to be enough therapists out there. We're going to be needed. But do the work on yourself first. It's an ongoing process. It's not like you do it and then you finish. It's an ongoing process of assimilation. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. These are great calls to action. Thank you. And I totally agree with the upskilling bit. Stanley, your 3 minutes on where are we going now?
Thank you, Hetty. And a lot of points have been made already. Coaching is not value neutral. There is an ethical, moral imperative. So what does that mean in practice is the question that we're grappling with. And there was a question in the chat box, I think it was Andra Morassi, who asked, how do we engage without being positional? And for me, part of this would be, firstly, to give permission to ourselves to be able to enter into conversations, as Zoe said, around politics, around power, which are not familiar conversations for us as coaches in our training, maybe even in our individual spaces. So give permission to ourselves for that, and give permission to our clients to enter those spaces of conversation. I think from a South African context, race has been a significant issue and completely avoided in the corporate space until coaches gave permission for coachees or clients to have a conversation around what does race mean, and subsequently what does gender mean, ethnicity. So we do have power in creating spaces of permission, and I think that's quite significant. To what Linda has said also, I think as a as a fraternity, as a community of practitioners, we also need to revisit our education has been individualistic, and to ask, are the models relevant, are the theories, is the underlying philosophy still valid, and does it serve us in the conversations that we need to have? And finally, what is our individual work? This is not something that's theoretical. It's a way of being. We as coaches also need to give ourselves permission, compassion to educate, to support one another around the deep personal work that is needed for this. And I would urge, as a last point, at the benefit of being in NGOs and working with NGOs, there is an available space for solidarity, for education, and for practice of activism for coaches that's easily accessible. And I would encourage that we look at taking that up.
Stanley, thank you so much. Such important last words. And I'd like to build on what we've said. This is a time of worry, which is where I began with the UN Human Development Report. And the calling card, if you like, of the UN Human Development Reports is that people is the greatest wealth of nations, are the real wealth of nations. And what they mean by that is they are resource. It seems to me that we need to hold ourselves both accountable, but also recognize the great courage and the great skills and the great capacity for change and transformation that human beings have. And that's the business we're in as coaches. And I'd like to just read a tiny quote from an article. I'm going to post it in the chat now. It's a paper written by a colleague of mine called Leslie Goldenberg, where she wrote about the roles of the coach, of internal coaches. And she ends by saying, taking a wide angle view, one could say that any coach on planet Earth is an internal coach, working within the ecosystem in which we live. Perhaps the next great work for all coaches is to serve as, and these are her three models, Trojan horses, field medics, and canaries in the coal mine, alerting us to the danger, striving to be part of the global systemic solution to the challenges we face, tending with humility and compassion to the needs of the planet and all life that lies within the planet. And this is also a time of regeneration. It's a time of mourning. It's a time of grief. It's a time of great danger. And it's also time to sow the seeds. And it seems to me that there's a huge imperative in this community with such skills, such resources, and such widespread and varied experience that we can bring together to do this. And my final quote is from Abdel Fattah Abu Zrour, who is in the Aida refugee camp in Bethlehem. And they say, we do not have the luxury of despair. We have to transform the garbage of suffering into seeds of hope. We have to create a better future for our children. And all of us are in that business of creating futures. It's what we do. We bring our love, our compassion, our skills, and our experience. And I hope that more events like this will blossom and flourish, the groups that Zareen talked about and others, where we can have these much needed conversations, because what they do is they nourish us with information and support, but they give us courage. They give us courage to go beyond the hierarchies that we have grown up with, which say that there is separation, that one race is superior to another, that one gender is superior to another, that we have to live separately and cut off our emotions, because that's a real man or a powerful leader doesn't let messy emotions get in the way. And we have to say that era is finished. This is the end of the Anthropocene. And if we are going to usher forth a cosmocentric world where there's an recognized, valued, and honored interdependency between all life, then we have a lot of work to do, and that work can be joyous. So we have 5 minutes to go. I've said enough. If people would like to either speak out, put into the chat, there's some wonderful richness in the chat. Just to say that Lenka will save the chat and put it onto the registration page for us all to dive into, for those who haven't been able to quickly click on the many, many links, the rich resources there. Please do tap into the other events at the Climate Coaching Alliance Festival Fringe. Eve has already mentioned the splendid book that she and many, many others, the Climate Coaching Alliance, oh, I don't know whether it can be seen, I'm blurring it, the Ecological and Climate Conscious Coaching. It's an absolutely tremendous resource. And reach out, let's link with each other.
And
thank you very much.
There is a continuation of the JGSG roundtables as well, with the 5th roundtable, which will be on the 20th of April. And you can find that on the JGSG website, which is https://jgsg.1. And then you can go to /events to see the events page, and there will be materials there as well. So as well as the AC sharing this resource, and thank you so much to Lenka for producing both the slides and the materials that we're going to pull together after this. George and I will be working on bringing a page together of the myths that we believe have now been busted by this group here today, and the new narratives that you have suggested as well. So we're looking forward to producing that one page as a resource for people to go forwards with and have more conversations about in their different spaces.
Thanks, Lorenza. George, is there anything you'd like to add? Oh, sorry, Lorenza.
I was just going to say, please do share in the chat. We love your thanks, which is, really nice to have, but we would really love to hear what one thing has shifted for you today.
Yeah.
Sorry, go.
No, absolutely. And what do you want more of from the JGSG as a consortium of the coaching, the widest possible definition of the coaching profession? Our task and our wish is to serve. George.
Well, while the comments come in the chat, let me express my gratitude to everyone that made this happen, and all the beautiful and diverse contributions we've had from all around the world today. This is the future, folks. This is where coaching is going. It's where it has to go. So it's there's an excitement, and there's a joy, and there's a love, as well as the more familiar emotions in it as well. And I really feel that in HD, full Technicolor today from you all.
Full Technicolor. And so it remains for me just to thank, with heartfelt thanks, our speakers, Dr. Joyner Teta, Zoe Cohen, Liz Hall, Linda Aspey, and Stanley Arumugam. Please look them up. Please engage in conversation. I know that they would welcome that. Thank you. Big thanks to my co-hosts, George Warren and Lorenza Clifford. Please do seek them out as well for further conversation. Please look up the JGSG website. Tell us what you want more of. And last, but by no means least, Lenka, thank you for holding this session so lightly and elegantly and efficiently. Thank you so much. Go well, everybody. We finished 1 minute before time. That 1 minute will buy you a cup of tea.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye,
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Hetty.
everyone.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you to you all for joining in these rich conversations and contributing so generously.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you all.